My name is Sarah Fairchild, and I was born in Wahoo, Nebraska, a very celebratory place to be born, but I never lived there. My parents lived in Ceresco, and I moved to Norfolk when I was just still a baby. So I grew up in Norfolk, and now I live in Lincoln, and I've been here since the 80s. For a living, I am a mentor for highly gifted kids for Lincoln Public Schools. I get to work one-on-one with some really smart and fun kids. I graduated from Norfolk High, and then I went to Doane in Crete, and I majored in English. I minored in media, which included television production and journalism and also print media. And then I came to Lincoln. I worked for a while in a Nebraska bookstore, and then I got tired of looking at the outsides of books, so I went on to graduate school and I got a master's plus in English. Definitely, the planes have an influence on what I write, because I like to write about what I see right in front of me. Or even if I'm just using my imagination is fed by the plains and Nebraska scenery, Nebraska people, and I'm very conscious of that. I've always loved poetry, and I think maybe the first one I loved was Edward Lear and his poems, and then in grade school, I started to hear some poems by Emily Dickinson, and she's still my favorite. I had to seek her out and read more and more. And I also fell in love with Poe and his musical poetry. And after that, I was hooked, but I just kept reading more and more people. Yes, in high school, I had my professor, or my teacher of journalism, was a good writing teacher, and she encouraged me both in writing poetry and in writing for the paper, and she was a really good influence. And in college, Evelyn Haller, Carol Peterson were my professors, and they were so encouraging. I started working for the Prairie Schooner when I was still at Doane, and Hilda Raz became a mentor and someone I deeply admire. I like to write at night when everybody else has gone to bed. I like the loneliness of that hour, and I'm not a morning person. But that's not when I write necessarily, because I don't always have the luxury of staying up late and writing, so I have to cram it in whenever I can. Oh yes, as soon as I was picking up a pencil, I was writing, and before that I was dictating to my mother and my grandmother, who also loved poetry. I am inspired by little things, which I think is very Nebraskan. We aren't overawed with mountains and things like that, so we learn to look for the little things and appreciate them. So I like to notice tiny things that are happening, or details of flowers or animals, or subtle things, and that's what I like to write about. Themes. I often write about, well, sometimes spirituality comes up in my poetry. Sometimes it's just about being alive and appreciating life. I've had some periods of dark poetry where I was rehashing negative things that had happened, but I'm not really writing that kind of poetry right now. I've played with various styles or forms of poetry, but I think I do have a style of trying to use condensed language, and I do have a voice that carries through whatever form I'm trying to use. I don't really think about the audience when I'm writing poetry. I do in other kinds of writing. Not when I'm writing it, but maybe when I'm revising. I'll say, oh, would somebody really understand this? They don't have the same background I do. So sometimes I'll have to go fill in details that I know very well, but someone else might not know. Keep on writing. That's my advice. I had someone ask me if I would ever tell a writer, a poet, to stop writing because their poems were so bad. And I said, no, never, because everybody has their own reason for writing, and she's writing for he or she would be writing for themselves. And also, you get better by practice. So there's many reasons to write, and I just think everyone should keep at it. Even if you're going through a dry spell, keep writing, because eventually you prime the pump and something good will come out. Oh, I have some things I'd love to write, and I've dreamt about writing a book about the history of rhyme, which I think is misunderstood. So that's one project I have. And also I have one of my grandmother's stories that I'd love to write about, and I haven't found the right medium, if it's going to be a story or a poem. I start on it from time to time, and it hasn't gelled yet. I'm the editor of Black Star Press, and we have published a number of chapbooks and some full-length books. But I think what we're most noted for is our Nebraska Poets Calendar. We published that from the early 90s through to like 2001, and then I had to take a long break. And we're finally getting back to it, and it's a publication that I think appeals to many different people, not just the little community of poets, because it has art by Nebraska artists accompanying a poem by a Nebraska poet, and they seem to fly off the shelves pretty well. If people buy one, they're as likely to buy 3 or 4 or 5, so I think people enjoy it. I have 12 poems because I choose one poem for each month, which means I feature one poet for each month. And then once I've chosen the poems, then I go and look for artwork that doesn't necessarily illustrate the poem, but something that dances with the images or ideas in the poem or in the season. So I like to find something that's already made by coincidence, that they weren't thinking of the poem, although sometimes I haven't found the right thing and I ask an artist to create something. I've invited 3 poets that are in the 2011 calendar. Mary Kay Stillwell is at the university, and she's actually, this doesn't matter as far as a poet, but she's actually the mother of a friend of my son's. So it's kind of a lucky coincidence. And yes, she's been writing in Nebraska for a long time, but I only discovered her when she moved to Lincoln. She was in Omaha before that. Another person I invited was Rex Walton, and he's very active in the poetry community, but I don't think he has that many chances to do a reading where he's featured. He puts together a reading series for the Crescent Moon, and he has a list of poetry readings that he emails to people, helps keep everybody informed so that we know, oh, so-and-so is reading, let's go there. And he writes really good poems, too. Also, I've invited John Johnson, who happens to be the very first poet in our calendar. He wrote the January poem. And again, I didn't realize it when I chose the poem, but he happens to be the friend of a friend. So the poetry community is kind of small. But I wanted a really pristine poem to start off the year, and I found John's poem. I'm really grateful to all the poets and the artists that contribute to the calendar, because without them, the calendar would never happen. My goal is always to promote Nebraska and the quality of poets in Nebraska, and also the quality of artists in Nebraska. I think we just have an awful lot of good poets here, and I want people to know it.
Good afternoon. My name is Meredith McGowan, and I am the curator of the Heritage Room, and I'd like to welcome you to the Heritage Room and to the John H. Ames reading series. We're very excited. This reading series has been around for more than 25 years. The readings are currently held on the third Sunday afternoon of the month, as you know, because here you are, at 2 o'clock. And I thank you for being here. This is, by the way, the 194th reading. Wow. Getting closer to 200. We are here in the Jane Pope Geske Heritage Room of Nebraska Authors. It is a special collection that's dedicated to promoting and preserving works by and about Nebraska authors. It's a representative collection. There are about 13,000 volumes, I would say, in the room here, written by more than 3,000 Nebraska authors. We also have information files, magazines, pictures, manuscripts. We have artwork around the room if you take a glance around the room, and other memorabilia as well. By the way, the Heritage Room is not tax supported. It is supported by the Nebraska Literary Heritage Association, and we'd like to thank the NLHA for the endowment established a number of years ago through their volunteer efforts. And we do invite you to come back to the Heritage Room during our regular public service hours. We are open Tuesday through Friday from 12 to 3, and on Sunday from 2 to 5. And of course, it is 2 o'clock here on a Sunday afternoon, and we are open, and we're having this program right now. So again, thanks for being here. The readings are filmed by 5 City TV, and for those of you who are watching this program and you're not in the Heritage Room, we are located on the 3rd floor of Bennett Martin Public Library at 14th and N Streets in downtown Lincoln. Our readers today are Sarah Fairchild, John Johnson, Mary Kay Stillwell, and Rex Walton. They are drawn together today, and this year, I guess, because of the Nebraska Poets Calendar. First, a little bit about Sarah. A Nebraskan, she grew up in Norfolk, although I think she was born in Wahoo, she told me earlier in the interview. She graduated from Doane College in Crete and UNL later with degrees in English. Her poetry has appeared in a number of publications, including Plain Songs. She does have a publishing company, Black Star Press, and created a Nebraska Poets Calendar in 1994, and then I think she continued through 2001, took a little break, and here in 2011, we're back with another calendar. Several of the poets featured in the 2011 calendar, John Johnson, Mary Kay Stillwell, and Rex Walton, will join Sarah today for the program, and she will tell you more about each one of them. And by the way, if you haven't noticed, there is artwork from the calendar that's on display on the 2nd floor Holyoke case, which is by the elevator, and also by the front door on the 14th Street exit. There's a window display with more artwork from the calendar as well. And Julie Thompson, we appreciate your doing that for us. And it will be here, I think, through the month of January. So if you don't get a chance today to see it, you can stop by at some point before the end of January. We are very happy to have Sarah here with us today, and the others. If you would help me welcome them, I'd appreciate it.
Hello, I'm so glad you came today. It's very exciting to be here in the Heritage Room. I just love this room with all the old books. And the Ames series is, it's an honor when you're asked to read for that series because it's, I think it's the most esteemed reading series in the city. I want to acknowledge and thank a few people myself. First of all, I want to say thank you to my husband, who is a partner in all my publications for Black Star Press, and he's the one that was responsible for all the calendar material. You notice he puts in there all sorts of things about astronomy and holidays, and acknowledges Nebraskans, artists and poets and writers and other notable Nebraskans. He puts in interfaith information and intercultural information, and I just think it makes a fascinating read. And I also want to thank Julie Thompson because she's my assistant editor, and she does so much. She organized the art display, which is here through the end of January, but she does so much else, from helping me select poems to getting it published and advice of every sort. And she has almost inexhaustible energy, which I'm short on sometimes, so I really thank her. And I'd also like to thank all the poets and artists that are here. I see several artists that whose work is featured in the calendar. I see Connie Bacchus-Yoder and Sally Cox, and Sue Cuomo Johnson, and there's other poets here that are also in the calendar, including Greg Kosminski. Lucy, are you in this year? Yeah, Lucy. Yeah, of course you are. Lucy Adkins, and I'm sorry if I missed anybody, but it's wonderful to have you all here. I'm going to read a few of my own poems, and then I will introduce the other poets who are actually in the calendar. I never published my own work. But here's a chance to read. I picked things mostly that are newer rather than older, and I tried to do it on a seasonal theme because the calendar has a seasonal theme. Okay, the first one's called December Morning Commute. And I wrote this last year. Remember all the snow and all the snow on top of that. Okay. White flocked trees line Normal Boulevard. The very air shimmers with glistening ice. Everything seems soft and in slow motion. Even the car accidents are beautiful. Puffy marshmallows nudging into each other in a slow dance. Muted emergency lights blinking red and yellow like the memory of past Christmas trees. Skid marks and footprints gently filling in with powdery snow. That's obviously a winter one. And I have another winter one I will do. This is a holiday poem, sort of. And it has a long, long title for a short poem, which I think is kind of fun sometimes. All right. After the holiday office party, where everyone is drinking and gambling and schmoozing, to Christmas music in a restaurant with dead animal heads staring from the walls. That's the title. Okay, low and golden hung the moon over the lights outlining the roofs of suburban houses in curved rows, over the uniform evergreens strung all in yellow, red, and green, lining the clubhouse lane. Above the artifice, it shone in ancient majesty, untamed. and my heart, thirsty, soaked it in, like a tree in drought inhales the rain. Thank you. All right, I couldn't resist bringing this next poem. It's one that I wrote for my husband-to-be, clear back probably 25 to 26 years ago. We just celebrated our 25th anniversary on the 6th of January. So this one was for him, and I still like it. Nesting. After beating my wings, hurling them in the face of some sun or some moon, I fall back, exhausted, into these branches, these arms you have been holding out to me from the start. At first I bristled my feathers, trembled high up on the spindliest twig, let one eye sleep at a time. But you, blossoming around me, thatching a green roof over my head, coaxed me down to sturdier boughs. I'm settling in now, gathering string, weaving a nest, singing songs. My time is almost up, so I'm just going to read two more poems. The first one that is actually set in the country near Norfolk, where I grew up, and it's full of nostalgia for me. In search of wild raspberries. Every summer when the elm trees, I'm going to start again. Every summer when the elm leaves curled from the heat of the sun and the sidewalk scorched bare feet, Dad would come and load us all into his car and drive into the country to look for wild raspberries. On the gravel roads, more dust than breeze blew through our open windows, pasting grit and sweat, till someone called out, "There's some!" By the time we stopped, of course, we had passed the spot, and Dad would have to back the car maybe a tenth of a mile till he spotted raspberry canes hiding in the brush along the fence line. We spilled from the car in our tattered clothes and sun hats, smelling like off, carrying empty peanut butter buckets or Cool Whip bowls, white inside until stained by the first purple berry. We picked only ripe ones, leaving green berries for the birds. Thorns dug into our arms, legs, hands, mingling small drops of blood with raspberry juice. Hot, thirsty, mosquito-bitten. We bickered over territory, whined to go home, but kept picking, adding tiny berry to tiny berry until the last container was full, the last berry picked, the sunlight too dim to see what we were picking. Then we piled back into the car and headed home. Mom would wash the raspberries while Dad lugged the antique sausage stuffer up the stairs and set it up on the kitchen table. Soon, the raspberries were in the belly of the beast, slowly crushed by the turn of a crank, the purple blood running into the kettle all night long. In the morning, the kitchen was filled with the clatter of jelly jars boiling and the sweet smell of hot raspberry juice. Mom let us chew unmelted paraffin like gum while we waited for the rare taste of hot raspberry foam skimmed from the top of the kettle and spread on soft buttered bread. My mom only pointed out after I'd written that poem that the reason Dad would take us raspberry picking, and he always did it in the summer, of course that's when they're ripe, but he always took us on the 4th of July because he didn't want us to blow our hands and brains out too quickly. All right, I'm only going to read one more, and this one is called For Gabriel, who is a relative of mine, a young man who unfortunately was arrested for a drive-by shooting in Omaha. And I've never sent it to him. I guess it's really more to me, even though I call it For Gabriel. What angel can reach you now, slipping between the bars of your cell, floating above you as you lie on your cot, staring at the cracks in the ceiling? Getting in would be no problem. Angels don't need to show IDs to surly guards. They just appear. But would you notice? Perhaps when you were very young, you could hear angels singing in your sleep. But now you've stuffed your ears with hate, or worse, indifference. It must be so, or you could not have raised that gun and aimed, not at a deer, but at a stranger, some kid hanging out at the wrong place at the wrong time. What were you thinking when you loaded your rifle with buckshot, the way your grandpa taught you by the river in the crisp autumn air, when leaves were drifting off trees and falling silently to earth without a cry? Why did you take that gun with you, cruising the city streets with friends, slowing to take careful aim, a greater thrill than catching a buck's eyes in your sights and taking him down? And now, what thrill is left if you memorize the ceiling cracks and dream of the life you could have led, the life you took away? If you could see the angel at your side, reaching out his arms to you, tears streaming like a mother's, could you open yourself like an unclenching fist to receive what you were hunting for, unknowing all along? And now I'd like to introduce John Johnson. Come on up. John has been writing since high school, and he was the first editor of Loris, the undergrad literary magazine at the university. But lately he's been really taking an interest in his work and sending it out and getting it published in places like Southern Poetry Review and the Nebraska Poets Calendar. So I'm excited to introduce John Johnson.
Thanks. Thanks for all your work on the calendar too, and Julie, of course. And thanks to Pat and Meredith for putting this on. Hi, everybody. This first poem is called "Springtime for Hitler." You guys remember that? You guys remember that movie? Yeah. It was. Anyway, if Hitler had been a woman, she would only sometimes have worn the same black boots, preferring instead fancy black claws with a bit of heel. Her great, tight cleavage would be packed in military front to inspire the nation, and her lipstick idealized as the platonic form of red. When she shouted, her high pitch would shatter windows across the motherland and secretly shatter the glass balls of men who said, "Excuse me," in German, and went discreetly to the men's room to shake out the little shards and glass dust from their black woolen trousers. When she invaded Poland, she said, "Please." Instead of the phallic thrust of goose-stepping, she used the knee-knocking Charleston. And at night, she would delicately pick the kitten off the crinkly mat of her global designs and hold it in her hands, stroking it while she chose which iron eagle brooch she would nestle to her bosom tomorrow. Thanks. This poem, a lot of my poems kind of explore the area between the imaginary and the real, and this poem is called "Imagine Crowd Noise." An old-time radio announcer stayed home for away games, unbeknownst to the fans, and read the play-by-play off the wire, making up details, playing crowd noises, giving the listeners the game they expected. His voice as familiar as the rituals of men at first and third and nobody out. A swing and a miss. Top of the order coming up. Their road emotions as practiced as a waltz, the twinge at a loss, the reunion with comfort at a win. We are so accustomed to things. And what leisure domain there is in words. How easy they make it to live in our heads and to stay home and imagine the game. Thanks. That was the one that was in Southern Poetry Review. You see, I'm finally taking interest in my work. That's kind of a nice way to put it. Daphne growing up. You guys know the myth. You guys know Apollo and Daphne, right? You guys, most of you probably do. It's probably a pretty literate crowd. Anyway, Daphne was this mortal that Apollo was interested in, and this is a little different. This is my version of that. She had changed into things before, a speck of stardust falling across the waters, becoming fish-like, uncoiling, big-eyed, like the forms found in stone around the tops of canyons. She'd been the light as she'd seen it, bright, staring, staggering to her feet, fondling a mother. She had changed from little girl to big girl, from big girl to young woman. Now everyone wanted her for her womb. Even the gods, such as they were, looked down from their cumulus bliss and were stirred, jarred, made aware of something beautiful they didn't have. Apollo most of all, the big man of the Elysian fields. He wasn't used to a single piece of real beauty outside of himself. She liked him at first. She liked being so lovable even the gods loved her. What a wonderful gift. But she couldn't escape from it, couldn't be free of his incessant love murmuring. She would be so much. She would be his all. She would be the ocean his river would find, etc. She didn't want to be those things. She wanted to be who she was. But even Apollo was a slave to time. Each sun he dragged up off the dark floor of the cosmos was a little different than the sun he had dragged up the day before. Everything changed. So as he ran after her one day, gushing his susurrus, she, who had changed much from the girl who had been flattered by his love, fled and found her way to hide most deeply in the woods around her. His soft palm found her soft, silk-covered haunches. But even as his ardor grew, so did her bark. From woman to tree she became breathless, one leafy-eyed toward the light, towards the clouds, which whitened like marble before her, letting her fall most firmly into their brightness. Okay. Pat says she likes birds. Does anybody else in the room like birds? Kind of a bird person? Oh, you got a lot of hand. Oh, it's birds and poetry must go together. That's really interesting. Poems are kind of like birds, aren't they? Kind of like this kind of happy, I don't know, small, beautiful things floating in the world. I don't know. And like birds, like birds, poems don't do anything either. So it's two things that are kind of nice about them, So this poem is called "From Birds of North America," and "Birds of North America" is a field guide I've had since I was a kid. It's one of my favorite books. It's a pretty thick book, and it's got you guys might know the book. It's got illustrations of kind of little hand paintings of all the birds, and each page there's maybe 6 or 7 birds in each page, and it's a beautiful book. Anyway, I still like it. And so this is from "Birds of North America." Yeah, you mentioned that my initials on one of these. Mm-hmm. See, that'd be J. Oh, there it is. Yeah. I'll do this without spilling. Okay, didn't spill it. To be one, to be watching one, to be a sheet of paper with the earless owls, barn, snowing, barred, spotted, great gray. Allow me this, to be this scruffy mouse-eater with archaic pre-dawn eyes. I mean, the understanding one has when gripped to a limb like that, almost blinking. What patience! How the millennia fall like snowflakes through your incarnations. Earless owls, small owls, hawk, burrowing, boreal, saw-whet, plumpness drawn on long pine branches, chickadees staring on for scale. While you are engrossed in your catalog, let me be 1,000 naturalists then, like snowflakes, quietly floating through the woods, frozen in mid-look, in genus building, mousing at the notebooks, almost turning the page. That's it. I've only sent that out to a couple places, but it almost got published. I got a real complimentary rejection letter, which is, I don't know, for those of you who are like, if sending these things out, it's like a complimentary rejection letter is almost as good as getting published.
Yeah,
It kind of is, yeah. So hopefully I get more of those. This one's terrorist strike at northern Spain. And the photo looks like a work of art or an educational model, as though by X-ray the wall of a building had been removed, exposing the cells we live in, the hive, neatly aligned and regular. How thin the walls separating us. How similar are our color schemes. Beige or ecru, some yellow, one orange, mostly dark trim. White rubble on the lip of each gaping square. Look, just look what thoughts can do. We all think chairs are comfortable. We all have similar appliances. There was a lone green couch fallen to street level, facing us as though we had been the news before the bomb went off. People are milling around assessing what one should do next. Just look what thoughts can do. That one, you guys know who, thanks. See, I like this ritual of applauding the poet. That's really a good ritual. Yeah, it's really nice. See if I can get my kids to do that or something. That's a good thing. That title, by the way, that was from a Lefty Frizzle album. Just look what thoughts can. You guys know who Lefty Frizzle is? Probably most of you probably do. Anyway, yeah, I'm kind of a fan. So, this is my favorite word. Is Laura Burton? Laura? Oh, there she is. Okay, great. Laura Burton Franz is here, and she helped. She translated. She didn't help. She translated the poem into German and French. Now, it's a short little poem, but it's a kind of a triptych in German and French. So I'll do the English, and then Laura. You want to come up now? Or you want to wait till I finish reading it? I guess, or then I got about, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 more for that, something like that. Hey, Laura, thanks a lot. It's my friend Laura. Laura teaches French and German at the university.
I teach German.
Oh, okay. But she knows French. Yeah, and you fluent in Russian too, I think.
No, I studied Russian.
But you're decent Russian. You're decent in Russian, maybe not fluent. So she's. Anyway, so she knows a lot about languages. Yeah. So this is called My Favorite Word. My favorite word for most of the spring was susurrus. Like I'd found the name for the floor of things. But now velleity is my favorite, offering that slightest of desires to stir the shimmering surface of all my collective thoughts at rest. From it arise the great loves, the hungers for territory, the ambitions and skyscrapers. But why, it says in its simplest, most delicate way, why disturb this lovely pool, this pleasant murmuring of things at peace, before we need anything, even a single word? And now Laura's going to do it in French and German. Thanks, Laura.
So, French first. Mon mot préféré. Mon mot préféré pendant la plupart du printemps était susurrement, comme si j'avais trouvé le nom du fond des choses. Mais à présent, vérité est mon préféré, offrant ce plus léger de désir pour agiter la surface étincelante de la neutralité parfaite. De cela proviennent les grands amours, l'aspiration au territoire, les ambitions et les gratte-ciels. Mais pourquoi, dit-elle, de sa manière la plus simple, la plus modeste, pourquoi trouble cette mare ravissante, ce brisement agréable des objets en paix, avant qu'on n'ait pas besoin de rien, même pas d'un seul mot? And now in German. Mein Lieblingswort. Mein Lieblingswort während des Frühlings war flüstern, als ob ich den Namen des Bodens der Dinge gefunden hatte. Aber jetzt ist Verität mein Lieblingswort. Es bietet das leichteste Verlangen, die schimmernde Oberfläche der vollkommenen Neutralität zu rühren. Davon entspringen die großen Liebschaften, das Hungern nach Territorium, das ehrgeizige Bestreben und die Wolkenkratzer. Aber warum, sagt sie auf einfachste, schüchternste Weise, warum dieses herrliche Gewässer beunruhigen, dieses wohltuende Murmeln der Dinge, ruhig und friedlich, wenn wir sonst nichts benötigen, nicht einmal ein einziges Wort?
Thanks, that was really nice. That's good stuff, wasn't it? That was partly for Jim Walla too, who likes the illusory and ambiguous quality of words. So, whatever that means. Does that mean anything? I don't know. It's big, yeah, and it's illusory too. Won't read that one. Won't read that one. How much more time do I got? I'll read my calendar poem. How much more? 3 more poems, something like that. Does that sound okay? Is that too many? Too few? Is that all right? What's time? I figured 10, 15 minutes each, but if there's 4 of us reading, it takes an hour. Is that right? I don't know. All right. So I'll skip my science fiction poems with some regret. I really like them, but I'll skip them. And this is called My Uncle. I just have 3 more, and they're pretty short. My uncle and I chatted next to my dying aunt. My uncle and I chatted next to my dying aunt. Movies, books, politics, the things we've always talked about. She was thin, almost hollow, morphined eyes, black yaw of a mouth, a glassy black witness of what's always here anyway, but faceless and not so prominent. What's left of her is, I imagine, comforted by the familiar rhythms of her husband's baritone, like my sisters and I were when we were children at night in the summer house, listening through pine slat walls to his tones and our mother's, wondering at the murmuring in the next room, wondering what words inhabited those sounds. And that was published in thanks. That was picked up in I was in the same issue with Matt Mason's wife in a magazine called Chicago Quarterly Review from last year. Oh, I was reading through the bibliographies. I was like, wow, there's Matt Mason's wife. I can't remember her name. What's her name? Sarah. Okay. Thanks. Yeah. This is winter. This is from the calendar. And speaking of birds, you guys know what a flicker is? Flicker, about half the heads are nodding. Flicker is it's like it's in the woodpecker family. It's kind of more yellowy and brown though. It's a pretty good sized bird. And it has kind of a nice scalloping flight, which I cut the scalloping part out of this poem, but if you want to imagine a scalloping flicker at the end, that might help you. It'd be easy for you to picture. You're a bird fan, so. Anyway, this is called Winter, and it's in the calendar. And this is for Sue, my wife. It's about my version of what I think winters are for her. Tea in cups, garden catalogs, birds at the feeder, winter in the window, in rituals of scarf, hat, stomping boots, heated chocolate, mostly disguised by the holidays, and afterwards mostly in her mind, preparing soil for climbing vines, rose bushes, new perennials, winter in the whitening of background to enhance the cardinal, the bearing of a branch where the flicker will light. So that's that one. Thanks. I should probably give the assist to Sarah on that too. She helped edit that one actually. There's a lot of stuff can be kind of bushy and kind of, I don't know. But it's nice to have a little help trimming it down. This is the last one. This is called The Ascension. And the original title of it was the Fourth Glorious Mystery, which is, for those of you who are Catholic, that's it's part of one of the mysteries of the Rosary. It's when Christ ascended into heaven. And instead of rising in the sky, what if he had stayed, laid down on the ground, and said goodbye with an ineffable smile, dissolving into a puddle of something like water or a starless night sky, his smile disappearing until he was no more than a glint on the surface, before sinking into the land. Then we would say of him, he is not a transcendent God. We would say of the tree, oh, there you are. We would drink in the Perugia of afternoon sunlight and say to our friends, I love you like dirt, like ashes in the wind. I adore you as you are lost to the underside of things, to the pulse of quiet which answers the thrust of light. That's it. All right, well, thank you all. And thanks for watching at home, and the people, and decades from now, that one person who watches this TV 50 years from now, greetings from the past. So, thank you all.
Thank you, John. I also want to introduce Mary Kay Stillwell, and she studied writing in both New York and in the Plains. She has written her dissertation on, was it Nebraska poets? Yeah. And she's had her own poetry published in illustrious places like the Prairie Schooner and Paris Review. So go ahead and read your poems.
Thank you. Thanks for the Poets Calendar, the Nebraska Poets Calendar. It makes the whole year good. I'd like to start with my September poem from the calendar, and then all the poems have to do with Nebraska, some aspect of Nebraska, and most of them are seasonal. So the poem from September is Snapshots. I grew up in Omaha, I should say, 50th and Dodge. Those of you who know that vicinity, I hope will recognize pieces of it.
It's in two parts. Part one. Every morning, my grandmother sent me off with my cold-packed lunch up 50th Street to the Catholic school. And every afternoon, my grandfather walked me to the playground at Dundee Public, where the gravel crunched beneath our feet, and something tight all day in my chest began to loosen. My uniform skirt fluttered against my legs as I swung higher, so high that when I closed my eyes, each hand held the hand of a parent, and I had to slow. Part two. My grandfather leaned against the red pipe fulcrum of the three teeter-totters in a row, ready to push his end of the beam down in order to raise mine high, then let go so that I might drop, squeal, grab the handle tight, bounce high as he took hold again, up and down, up and down, up and down, up until the bright sun dimmed and then dipped low into the horizon. Supper time drew near, and we had to go, both of us scraping our everyday souls against the gravel to slow our way home. Thank you. I wanted to read Daylilies, which is not really, isn't set in Nebraska, but on our honeymoon we went to this island, Fire Island off Long Island in New York City, in New York, and I always think of corn lilies and daylilies and all sorts of lilies as Nebraskan. And we went to this small beach community, Ocean Beach, and it was all full of daylilies and corn lilies. And then next to us in Seaview, they had more different varieties of lilies. And I was just so taken by that. So this is daylilies. And I'll list the names of some of them. Some of them you may know from your own plantings. Ruffled apricot, master touch, grand finale, these are the daylilies. They grow everywhere here, at Seaview, alongside country roads, schoolgirl and joyful occasion, cherry cheeks, prairie blue eyes. 3 years of variation, hilled bandit, pleasure, and patterned gold. If I were a cat, I would live among them, among the deep green arches and slender necks. I would listen to their fine-colored trombones. A soft, bright rain would fall around me, but I am not a cat. We pin prayer flags in the backyard trees. Red and yellow ribbons ripple like butterflies in the breeze. We walk along the beach, hunting colorful rock and unbroken seashells. Sometimes we swim. The cat is unconcerned. She watches the bushes, guards the back door, which she thinks is hers. She watches the prayer flags, crouched with such intensity that I think she must be praying. Perhaps she also thinks them butterflies or birds. This cat does not yet know daylilies, although she has appeared in many poems and in many guises. Golden chimes, banded. This is the first poem in which my husband appears as my husband, as in we pin prayer flags and we swim. I pray to the daylilies, natives of China and far-off places. They are a crisp and lovely magic, and their flower lives one day through. Ambrosia and lemon lily, they have bloomed one on the heels of the last on Olympus and Eden. Joyful occasion and patterned gold to this very summer when we hunt colorful rocks and unbroken shells. Red and yellow ribbons ripple in the breeze that lifts the corners of the bright orange flags. The cat is in her glory. Sometimes we swim. And 21 years ago in December, we brought our son home from Columbia, Michael Fairchild's sometimes spouse on Facebook.
On Facebook.
Not in real life. We should explain that. They're virtually connected. And so this poem is about going to a garden in Medellin, where we met Will and brought him home. And at the time, well, before that, we had not wanted children, so it seemed very odd to be in Columbia loving this little boy. And we thought we were going to have one child. And I realized in retrospect that I started wanting a daughter already when we were in Columbia. And so this is a poem about what I think inspired me. It's called After Sightseeing. This is the botanical garden, although this year there are no orchids in the orchid capital of the world, very much like the Urbe Manor it once was, lakes, woods, lawn, trees, and other flowers. This bronze is a tribute to Matremont, at rest, this valley our cradle. A small train carries 5 and 6-year-old girls, alternating shy and bold when we meet them at the wrought iron gate. This is Nora, our guide, Virginia, our taxi driver, who carries our son. It is another mild day, winter in Medellin, May, a few leaves fall. Big boys play basketball behind the restrooms. At the garden shop, there are starts, clipping slips to take home. And then there are these little girls again at the gate, snapping on and off like lights, ready for June, summer in another hemisphere. And now we're back to birds. Winter is not my favorite season, but I just love to look out. My husband has a feeder outside, and this that I'm going to describe in the poem happens nearly every morning, or every morning I'm up and looking out when the black cardinal turns red in the light. Black cardinal. Morning's milk warms the horizon, and in that first hint of light, the male cardinal, black against a field of husk, pecks for seeds at the base of the bare ash tree. The female, lovely in her paisley shawl, is sleeping. When the milk spills blue onto the roofs, his beak crest, his heart-shaped body rust, and I'm reminded that the sun, a mother who lives on the other side of the world, visits her daughter nearly every day for lunch. It's not my story to tell, but by the end a rattlesnake turns the daughter into a redbird. Quish, 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 she calls from the bushes. Each spring the cardinal courts his love, offering her the seed from his beak. She thinks he wants to foxtrot, and sometimes they do for a moment before she extends her tufted head and they kiss. Back then, had all gone as planned, our ancestors might have returned from ghost country. Instead, the dead remain dead, and the male cardinal waits under the feeder. As she shakes open her shawl, he bursts into flame. I lived in New York for many years, and when I went away, my brother was still very young, and when I came back to visit, well, as you can imagine, he got older. And I grew up during my high school years a farm girl and did all these things before my brother was around. He's 15 years younger than I was and did all these farm chores around. When I came back to visit, then there were 4 of us, who would sometimes be in the field. And his birthday is coming up on Friday, so I was thinking about him, and I wanted to read to you Picking Up the Bales. There are 4 of us now to pick up the bales, to balance them for the sharp turns that lead to the barn. I drive the tractor that pulls the hay wagon, and because the Massey is new to me, my mother rides the fender, shotgun, she says, to watch for washouts along the terraces. My brother lifts the bales to the hay rack. My stepfather stacks. Alfalfa flies as green and as quick as grasshoppers around them. It comes back gradually, and by afternoon I go easy between the windrows, judge the weight by the curve of the spine. Bales light, we move quickly. Bales heavy, and I slow. And I'll finish with 2 poems about art in Nebraska. It's really awesome reading at the Heritage Room because we're surrounded by all the writers and the people of Nebraska who've gone before us. And each of us, each generation takes its place, living and writing and making art. Taking our place. Noisy this morning at the Cafe d'Art, Lincoln, Nebraska. High and wide windows all along. Cather, Sandos, Keys, Isley, Newhart, Black Elk looking in, and the rest of us, newcomers, singing the quick notes of the lark looking out, sipping tea or coffee or fraps, pen scratching, leaf and acorn, peony and shepherd's purse, surprise lily and iris, sweet William and bleeding heart, soybeans and corn, carrots and kale, bales and sacks, stacks and buckets, pecks and bushels, pavement and bike rack, street, cross street, names on a manifest, tribes on the move. And I want to finish, the last time I was here, which wasn't too long ago, I noticed Red Entrance by Weldon Keys, and I have just loved that painting just for years and years. And so it was like seeing an old friend. And so I wanted to read this poem called Red Entrance, which came from the Keys painting. And now you'll understand what it's about. Red entrance is always there, like a door standing open, and even after we pass through, as in birth, beyond it lies another. This goes on forever, or until we face that last entrance, an exit, of course, like the others. And we must tear ourselves away from the known, as sad as we are curious. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Okay, well, last but not least, I want to introduce Rex Walton. He is, he was also, he's been writing for years, and he was involved with the Loris magazine, which he co-edited with a friend of mine, Susan Harper. And he does many good things for the poetry world around here. He organizes a reading series at the Crescent Moon called Poetry at the Moon, and he publicizes that. And he has an email list, and he sends out information about all sorts of poetry readings and events and keeps us informed. So I really appreciate that. He has had his poems published in Plain Song and Plain Song Review, among other places, and Nebraska Poets Calendar now. He's our, October. He's our October child.
Thank you, Sarah. And Julie. I've got 3 or 4 poems today. I'll read mine from the calendar, of course, and I'm also going to read Marjorie Sizer's poem. Marge is a good friend of mine. Her poem is in here for March, and she is in California. The last email I had from her, she was visiting one of her relatives. It's, I think, 92 years old, her aunt. And I did the same thing earlier this year. I visited not an aunt, but my dad's old friend from the military who's 91 this year. And they fought in World War II and went in out of the back of a plane at 3 o'clock in the morning on D-Day. And so my poem in the book is dedicated to my dad, but also to his friend. Now I have to find October. It's right after September again this year. That's always helpful. You notice how some things, they have that regular appearance and worth to them. They keep me on track. This poem is written for my father, who passed away 4 years ago, and my sister and brother and I were in the garage doing the garage sale thing and packing up things for Goodwill, etc. And he always had lots of things that he saved up and used down to the very last inch, among them gloves. This is called Clearing Out His Tools from His Shelves. There's artwork that goes along with each of these poems, and that's one of the interesting things. And as Sarah mentioned, there's some of the artists here today, and if you look around town, you go to the various openings, and the first Friday gallery walks. Many of these artists are in Nebraska and in Lincoln and have their works here. So that's a very good local thing for the artists as well as the writers. And I'm very glad to see that in this calendar, and then also all the people that are here today that are represented by the calendar directly or indirectly. Of course, one of the things that was mentioned when I sent this poem in was that I kind of cheated because they said there were only so many lines of poetry that you could send in. That's all that would fit. So, of course, I picked a prose poem, which is border to border, top to bottom, and they managed to fit it in, and I have to give them some congratulations for that. It filled up the entire page.
He tricked us.
I tricked them, and I've been suffering ever since. From behind the box of bird feeders, the handheld fertilizer spreaders, I find the gloves as I lift boxes from shelves along the garage wall to the truck going to Goodwill. Gloves, one of many pairs, but these well worn, open to the air in many places, yet not discarded. I hold them in my hands as if holding hands with my father. They are still, palms up, one cupped in another, a passivity unmatched in the lives of these gloves. My father, not one to live unmoving, he wore these out being himself. I see the form of his hands embedded, sweat the agent of stretching, the ring finger almost showing his ring there in the form leather makes of itself as it yields. I give in here to a moment of silence for his continual presence, his noise of one appearance after another, these gloves a latest assessment, a latest attestment, a sure and visible sign. I slip my hands in them, assembling ghost around ghost, my hands fitting into his hands. Once more we hold, then do not let go. I reach out my arms, turn the gloves we both wear. We feel the pulse of present bend and blend with what is passing. No more here to him than he to me, nor less. Me, I go to the tool chest, sitting on the tailgate, find his hammer, his quart jar of nails. We walk to the side yard, measure the task unfolding. Hold nail, swing hammer, air parting before the steel, the day parting from my previous plans. He gives us one more chance at fixing the errant swing of his garden gate, one more time to hold, to work together until dark. And then Marge's poem is about cranes in the river, which is appropriate for a March poem. And March is coming up soon, so you have to believe in that. It's just that February, you just have to get through February somehow, and so you can get to March. And so reading a poem about the cranes in the river and the cranes coming back is always hopeful to me. And there's a great linoleum print on the page by Marilyn Reynolds, which of course is a crane. It's called You and I, the Cranes, the River. It was something we did one night. The cranes were black silhouettes, thousands lowering in long strings to land in the river. We stood at peepholes in a shed on the bank, silent, watching. And I began to wish someone would see us, witness us, you and I, durable in our heavy coats and scarves, looking out into the dark. We were not jaded then. Nothing remarkable happened for an hour. No talking. We didn't want to spook the cranes standing on their sandbars, trilling their all-night song. When you pointed toward a peephole in the western wall, turned my shoulders, mouthed a word, one word. Vapor rose from your mouth. Moon, you said. And we looked at it together, a thin, white, curved tusk, a filament, a lost string, a moon on its back. At a small window, we looked at the moon together. That's by Marjorie Sizer. And I call this one a Christmas proposal mainly because it showed up at that time, and I was trying to write something for Christmas, and it ended up being about dolphins. Who knows how that happens? It's just that whimsical things that happens when you're trying to write a poem about birds and then something shows up about fish. The dolphin sleeps with half his brain at a time. the other half keeping watch with its own eye seeing. And the elephant, asleep on his feet, rocking himself gently, slowly, but on his feet, ready. This is how the animals sleep, with some part of them up and on alert, sentinel ready to alert the rest of the body, to call to action the rest of the defenses out of rest, out of slumber, into the wake state, each tendril, each whisker vibrating at the key of G. And man, I see shopping and work and the intricate tracery of tail lamp and headlight weaving the town red and yellow and green as thousands of us zip and zap around this earth preparing for Christmas. Garlands strung, stringing, plugged into timers so that the lights automatically zizz and sizzle at their appointed hour, leaving us free to work more, see more, sing more, purchase more, wrap more, burn more, hear more. But what part of me remains asleep? And is there a part of me that remains awake to listen when I hear, to understand what I see, to respond to what out there beyond my personal border calls, cries for some small measure of careful attention and care and love? The animals do sleep, but carefully measure the world around themselves for what stalks and what brings hunger and misfortune and death. So do we fully sleep in the midst of our self-induced commotion? What ear is open to the wind tonight, listening, listening for one child beyond crying, starved and neglected so long he does not whimper anymore, for no one has yet come to feed him, bandage him, or even hold him for a little while, for even a little while. Do as the animals do. Open your eyes to the dark and listen. Out there, just a little ways away, is the rest of the world, almost silent, and it's waiting for you. I tend to start writing about one particular thing. Sometimes you're glad that one thing shows up on your radar and wants to be written about, and generally when that happens, if it's something good, it opens up gates that if you hadn't begun that one line or that one try at putting something down, you never would have gotten to the middle and the end of the poem, which opens up kind of on itself, in itself, from something mysterious. I never do know what that is. I'm glad it works, though, because otherwise I wouldn't be writing much. And this poem started out because I was driving on one of these cruddy days where it was raining and it was icing, and I was heading east on O Street, coming up to the Harris Overpass, the new one, and wondering exactly what condition it was in, and that big stupid $100,000 sign was flashing, winter driving conditions, and I'm like, duh. We paid $100,000 to find that out, you know? And I thought, well, this is a dumb beginning for a poem, but I'll see if I can go with that. It's called 35 Degrees and Raining on the Overpass. From the west end of Lincoln, where sunsets originate, concrete has risen to assume the identity of bridge, of passageway, of conduit, a bent upward curve going from steam shroud of the packing plant breathing its own last breath, then onward with a long sailing or soaring over the Burlington yard with its 100 years of train car, diesel spill, the ground-in black coal scattered from engines laboring decades ago, barely gone in the geography of universal time. This arc is a contract, a trivial covenant, the end game of a burning fire lit 50 million years ago when my chromosomes were seabed clay, mingled among the sanctity of shells drifting an ancient ocean. It is not even the end game, but interlude, an imposition of the imperfect expansion of the American mind, a roadway going briefly airborne, held by steel-strung concrete thrust down to rock, up to meet air in its singular and everlasting form, up to hold the hurry and whine for a few years as road rage and winter salts eat their children. But what matter, chromosomes or clay, or the omnipresent shift of Earth on its axis, the spooling down of the great turbine driving the rain cloud, or winter stasis, or spring rains carrying Wyoming silt into the nesting grounds along the Platte? What matters is nothing much connected to my drive over this bridge, while arcing down the eastern end into the cold dark of a Sunday to the intersection of 9th and O, landing briefly before a turn and a whiff of spring, climbing the billboard there, a frail two-dimensional magnolia blossoming with bold font declaring my destiny on American Airline 457 touching down in the eternal blossoming of Orlando or Auckland, that brief violence of tire on tarmac mirroring airframe to Exotica, the frozen Nebraskan teetering on to the sands of Florida or New Zealand. But I am gone from this intersection, around the block in the chilly darkness, following my programming that overrides sleep, overrides dreaming, my foot toe dancing the pedals, my heart on hold as the steering parking lot slides into view, workday shifting its tentacles, its tractor beam onto me. I roll into this parking space, turn the key off, began to gather my workplace face, my workday hands, preparing to climb into another life, when silence, that brief, implacable, sinuous beast that wants me back with him at the reading table, the drawing board, the writing desk, tells me a way through this. Look back, traveler. See the brick face of Knickerbockers at 9th and O as you swerved right, accelerated against the clock, as your eyes grabbed an image there of New Zealand, seen from the window of a 747. You remember seat 37A, the tray table just going up on the attendant's command, your seat back swinging to the fully upright position, your captain calling off temperatures at Vero Beach and Sunnymead, gate numbers in case you were traveling on to Singapore, Malaysia. You remember? There is no billboard anymore on that brick wall, only the blankness where a mural was whitewashed away in September. Nothing showing through but an uneven layering of paint that somehow catches street lamp and headlight as you flash through, sawing away on steering, stutter dance on pedals, and the mind whirling to a long-away sing in Huntington Beach, California. When you were 9, it was September, and in love for the first time with an ocean. So I stop. In my parking lot, I stop. I am the traveler, seeing. I am the not quite 10-year-old, running into surf, melding into wave, wanting nothing more than this, than that. I am the traveler, stopped and stopping this here, wanting nothing more than a clear path, a warm afternoon, enough sand meeting water exactly and perfectly at wave's end. This is the time where time explains itself quietly, with no diagrams or sets of instruction, but clear, a hand in mine leading backwards and forwards, saying, here, this is a wave, this is a wave, this is a wave. Join me. Thank you. This is a good crowd. I'd like to thank you all for coming out. I know the thing that helped me the most was that the sun started briefly peeking out and I gained hope. You know, there's this seasonal disorder that we have on wintertime and wanting to stay in, you know, resist that entirely. Then you'll get through February. So thank you for coming. Thank you for having our poems and our artwork in Black Star Press's 2011 Poets Calendar. And it's been a great afternoon. Thank you for coming.
I just want to tell you guys that I brought calls for the 2012 Poets Calendar for both art and poetry. So if you're interested, I'll give you a sheet of paper on how to contact us.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank you all for coming too, and I appreciate that your comments there, Rex. A couple of things. There is a fairly new flyer on the Heritage Room.